Em entrevista exclusiva à âncora da CNN, a Christiane Amanpour, a líder do partido Reunião Nacional, Marine Le Pen, falou sobre as propostas que tem para a França, incluindo a redução do envio de ajuda militar à Ucrânia. Vamos acompanhar os melhores momentos.
Marine Le Pen, welcome to the program. Tell me something first. Were you surprised when President Macron threw the dice and laid down this gamble? What did you think?
Thank you, first of all, for your invitation. We asked for the dissolution of Parliament as a result of the European elections. But what surprised us is that he did it so quickly. I think that he was trying to obtain an absolute majority because he only had a relative majority at the National Assembly. And he thought that by rushing this election and giving a very short deadline, he would disorganize the opposition political movements and that he would come out victorious in the election. But it wasn't the case.
So you think he's lost this gamble?
Yes, he has obviously failed in his project, since the results he got in the first round are not good. And the national rally that I'm happy to belong to and that I've been leading for more than 10 years appeared as the great winner of this election in the first round, regardless of the result of the second.
As we know, a third of French voters voted for you and for your party, and two-thirds did not. And as you know, President Macron is trying to get a coalition to stop you, a firewall, so to speak, to stop you becoming the majority in Parliament. What does it feel like to be considered so dangerous? How does it feel?
We don't represent any danger apart from making him lose power. In reality, all the energy that he puts into fighting us, it's simply because he knows that we are the alternative movement. We are the ones who can secure an absolute majority. The far left does not have that option. So the danger of which he's talking is a threat to his own power. But what's paradoxical is that he called for a dissolution by saying that the people should have their say again. But by strategizing between the two rounds, by withdrawing his candidates, asking people to vote for the far left, he's actually refusing to let French people express themselves freely. It's rather paradoxical.
It's still a third that you got. Do you admire Kylian Mbappé, the hero of French soccer?
I'm not much of a football enthusiast, I'll be frank.
But as a national hero?
I believe that Mr. Mbappé is a very good footballer, but this tendency for actors, footballers and singers to come forward and tell French people how they should vote, and particularly to people who earn 1,300 or 1,400 euros a month, whilst they are millionaires or even billionaires who live abroad, it's starting to not be well received in our country. French people are fed up of being lectured and advised on how to vote. This election is an election of emancipation in which the French people want to take back control of their destiny and vote as they see fit.
You jumped in because you knew what I was going to ask you, so I need to explain. What he said was, I don't want to represent a country that doesn't correspond to my values, our values. People say don't mix football and politics, but this is really important, much more important than football. The situation is dire and we need to act. He didn't tell people how to vote, he just said you don't represent the kind of country that he would want to play for.
Yes, well, we know exactly why he did it and what the purpose of his statement was. But then again, these are people who are lucky enough to be living comfortably, very comfortably, to be protected from insecurity, poverty, unemployment, and everything else that affects and hurts our compatriots. I think that at a time when the population is preparing to vote, they should show a bit of restraint. Let me give you an example. A left-wing mayor came to see me and said, "I've never voted for the National Rally, but I can't stand hearing any more lectures from people who know nothing about how the French are suffering. So this time, I'm going to vote for you." That's what these kinds of statements lead to.
It's interesting you say that he's privileged. Yes, now he is. But he represents, I think, people who are, immigrants, people who are minorities, people who've had to work very hard. So I need to ask you about your economic program. You have said that you want to help people by slashing energy tax like TVA on energy, sales tax on energy. But from the figures that we've got, that would cost 38 billion euros, because you say that you will slash benefits to certain immigrants, but that will only save you 700 million euros a year. So how do your figures add up?
First of all, in response to your comment earlier, no, Mr. Mbappé doesn't represent French people with an immigration background, because there are far more of them living on the minimum wage who can't afford housing and can't afford heating than people like Mr. Mbappé. As regards the rest, allow me first of all to say that the economic results of Mr. Macron, supposedly the Mozart of finance, are catastrophic.
But that's not what independent economists say. They say he's run a pretty good economy, that he's made it a very interesting and attractive investment for foreign businesses.
Catastrophic. The record trade deficit, an all-time record in French history. The 7 years of his presidency have considerably weakened the country, where the situation of French people today is such that they can no longer fill their cars with gas, and many can't fill their shopping carts. So something has to be done. We need to save money on spending that isn't vital. I'm thinking, for instance, of the net contribution to the European Union that has tripled under Emmanuel Macron. Is it useful that it should triple under Emmanuel Macron?
It's interesting to hear you talk about this because, as you know, the economy minister, the finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, has said that RN, your party, you, would take France, Frexit in disguise, take France out of the EU some way or the other. And by renegotiating, whatever you want to call it, but essentially take it out of the general EU contribution. And when I spoke to you back in 2017, when you were running for president in 2017, you said, when I'm president, I'll organize a referendum. If I can't negotiate, and you called it France sovereignty, I will put it to the people in a referendum. And I will ask the French people to leave the EU. That's what you told me in 2017 in your presidential race. Do you still stand by that?
No. And I've said it in the clearest possible way. We're not going to leave the European Union, but for one simple reason. We now have the means with a number of our allies, and the French have given us the political strength to enter into negotiations. It's perfectly possible to want to renegotiate, and that's where Bruno Le Maire is wrong. You can negotiate a certain number of European Union policies and defend France's interests without necessarily wanting to leave the European Union.
Can I ask you, because you have spent a long time trying to rebrand your party to the extent that here you are on the verge of potentially taking power in government. But there's still a lot of troubling statements from members of your actual current party, including people who are currently, candidates for this election. Like North Africans came to power in 2016. These people have no place in high places, in high positions. Ministerial positions must be held by Franco-French people, un point c'est tout. I mean, then there was a very unfortunate image of a mixed-race child in Brittany carrying a Breton flag, and then there was racist insults, and then this candidate put a white face, and he labeled it true Brittany, false Brittany.
Madame, there are...
No, I just want to ask you, is this acceptable now in today's RN?
No. We had to put forward We had to come up with 1,000 candidates in 48 hours. 1,000 candidates. 1,000 candidates in 48 hours. Let's be very clear. Jordan Bardella said very clearly that people who have made unacceptable comments will be brought before the movement's Conflicts Commission and will most certainly be excluded from the movement, as others have been in the past. See, I mean, I think that in any political movement, there can be what we call black sheep.
These people are still... Okay, I'm telling you, and it's not me telling you. This is in the French press. Will they be expelled?
I'm not contesting the existence of these comments. I want to explain that in response to these comments, our party immediately initiated disciplinary proceedings against the candidate. And as a general rule, they are excluded because of these remarks. Other political movements who also have candidates who make unacceptable remarks, rather than excluding them, they actually protect them. They cover them up. And I think that's what we need to look at.
Yeah, but I just want to know, will these people be excluded? Will they be expelled?
They are already facing...
No, they're running right now. They're now candidates. These names...
Madame, forgive me. We have certain procedures.
Yeah, but you've got an election in 3 days.
Madame, forgive me. But that's not my vision of justice. We have statutes whereby people in this situation must be called before the Conflicts Committee, and they will be. There is a 21-day delay, but believe me, the jurisprudence of our commission is extremely tough, and we do not let this kind of language slide.
Let me get to foreign affairs. You have in the past said things that cause people to worry about you regarding, for instance, Putin. You've talked about how, you know, Crimea, you said it to me, was always Russian. You said the sanctions on Putin should be removed, those that were put on him for annexing Crimea and invading parts of Ukraine. Now he's fully invaded. Are you committed to the victory of Ukraine? Will France keep supporting Ukraine against this illegal invasion? Do you call it an illegal invasion? And will France continue to provide Ukraine with weapons to defend itself?
Madame, I think we can consider that the situation in Crimea was much more complicated than it is made out to be. But that has nothing to do with what Russia did now. What Russia has done here is violate Ukraine's territorial sovereignty, violate Ukraine's freedom, and bring war to Ukraine. From the outset, we have condemned Russia in this matter, and we have supported Ukraine throughout these 2 years, indicating that we have 2 red lines, which were sending French troops to Ukrainian territory, because the French are, I believe, totally opposed to this, and the delivery of long-range weapons that could hit Russia and therefore make France a co-belligerent in this conflict.
What did you make of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia today tweeting that the people of France are seeking a sovereign foreign policy that serves their national interests and a break from the dictate of Washington and Brussels? They're talking about your potential, you know, head of government. They seem to be saying they welcome you coming to power. Does that bother you?
I don't feel like I need to be held accountable for Russian provocations. I mean, writing that tweet, I don't know if it's revenge against Emmanuel Macron, but what's certain is that it's a form of interference. And in that sense, I find it unacceptable. I think it's a provocation.
Jordan Bardella has said that only with an absolute majority would he accept to lead the next government. If you do not get an absolute majority, will the RN take up the prime ministership?
If we don't have an absolute majority, we'll try to find one. In other words, we're going to turn to a certain number of MPs who weren't elected with us, but who might agree to support the policy we want to pursue, and thus form this absolute majority. If we don't succeed, I mean, Jordan Bardella isn't going to agree to be Prime Minister just to have the Prime Minister's name on a business card. if he can't do anything, if he can't get any laws passed because this absolute majority hasn't been found, then there's no point in agreeing to go into government. It would even be, how can I put it, a form of betrayal of the electorate, because voters elect us to do something, to change Emmanuel Macron's policies, not to sit on comfortable armchairs behind Louis XV's furniture to manage current affairs.
Final question. The fact that your party did so well in the European elections, and so did Giorgia Meloni's party, and so did AFD. I mean, you know, AFD, as you know, a little bit like the former National Front, is very scary. The fact that the far right is becoming a very, very powerful force in Europe, and who knows, maybe now, with all that's going on in the United States, Donald Trump might win a second term. How do you see Europe changing?
First of all, I strongly dispute the term far-right, which in your country refers to small groups that are extremely radical and violent. If you like, the equivalent...
You don't think you're far-right?
The equivalent of what we are in the United States is between the centre-right and the centre-left with regards to ideas. So I think this...
You're kidding me, right?
Yes. Yes, I'm telling you very honestly. I think this use of the term far-right carries a stigma and is very pejorative. It does not correspond to what we are, and not at all to what the far-right is in the United States. That's the first thing to say. Secondly, we can't put everyone in the same boat. For example, in Europe, we distanced ourselves from the AfD party because we're in total disagreement with a number of their statements. So together with Mrs. Meloni, and with our differences too, are what we call patriots. In other words, we defend the existence and the power of nations within the European Union because nations are the expression of the French people. When the European Union takes on certain roles without consulting anyone, it is no longer democratic. We are defenders of nations. We want a Europe of nations, a Europe that respects the decisions of the people and not a super technocratic structure such as it exists today. And that's the path that we want to follow, a Europe of nations that's respectful, that leads projects, a Europe that doesn't restrict, that doesn't threaten, that doesn't blackmail when it comes to subsidies. Because that's not our vision. Our Europe is the Europe of Airbus. Forgive me, it's a competitor. It's the Europe of Ariane. It's not the Europe of Madame von der Leyen. And so we will fight within Europe to redirect Europe in the direction that we want.
Would you like to see Donald Trump win again?
It's not for me to comment on American politics because I'm respectful towards democracy. It's up to the Americans to decide. They're the best place to decide who should defend them and ensure the prosperity of the country. I have a lot to do myself in France without having to comment on elections that are taking place abroad.
Marine Le Pen, thank you very much for joining us.